I've moved on. The money's mine. The house is mine. Good luck over there. I stared at the email on my laptop screen, the words blurring slightly in the harsh fluorescent light of the communications tent. Around me, the constant hum of generators and distant radio chatter filled the air at Forward Operating Base Lightning in Afghanistan. The smell of dust and diesel fuel hung heavy, but none of that registered. All I could focus on were those 17 words that had just shattered my world. My name is Lauren Bishop. I'm 35 years old, a captain in the United States Army, and I was halfway through my third deployment when my husband decided to destroy our marriage via email. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not even a phone call. Just a cold, calculated message sent while I was 7,000 miles away, serving my country. I scrolled down to see the attachments. Divorce papers. Bank statements showing our joint savings account had been drained. $38,000 gone. Photos of a young blonde woman lounging in what looked suspiciously like my living room, her feet propped up on the coffee table I had saved for months to buy. The injustice burned in my chest. For 6 months I had been sleeping in a concrete bunker, eating meals ready to eat, and dodging mortar fire while Eric lived it up with his new girlfriend in the home I had worked years to afford. Every dollar in that account had been earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Night shifts at the base hospital before my deployment. Extra training courses that meant months away from home. Military pay that I had carefully saved while Eric bounced between part-time jobs and grand schemes that never panned out. The woman in the photos looked barely old enough to drink. 22, according to the email signature that identified her as Brittany Hart, future Mrs. Bishop. The audacity was breathtaking. She was wearing my jewelry, sitting on my furniture, probably sleeping in my bed. But as I read the email a second time, something shifted inside me. The initial shock gave way to something colder, more calculating. Eric had always underestimated me. He saw the woman who cooked his dinner and did his laundry, not the soldier who had survived 3 combat deployments and earned a Bronze Star for valor. He had made a critical error in judgment, and as the rage settled into icy determination, I realized he was about to learn exactly who he had married. I closed my laptop and walked outside into the Afghan night, the stars brilliant overhead in a way they never were back home. This was far from over. The next morning brought the familiar routine of deployment life, but everything felt different now. As I went through my duties at the base medical facility, treating everything from routine checkups to combat injuries, my mind kept circling back to Eric's betrayal. The other soldiers noticed my distraction. "You okay, Captain?" Staff Sergeant Martinez asked as we prepped for the morning briefing. "You seem off today." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Long night." But it wasn't tiredness. It was the peculiar clarity that comes when someone you trusted completely reveals their true nature. Eric and I had been married for 8 years, together for 10. We met when I was a young lieutenant, fresh out of officer candidate school, and he was working at a sports bar near Fort Campbell. He was charming, funny, and seemed to understand the demands of military life. Or so I thought. Looking back, the warning signs had been there for years. The way he always seemed to have excuses when bills were due. How he would disappear for hours without explanation, claiming he was job hunting or meeting with potential business partners. The gradual shift from supportive spouse to someone who resented my career, my deployments, my success. During my first deployment to Iraq, he had been the perfect military spouse. Care packages, daily emails, promises to hold down the fort. By my second deployment, the communications had become sporadic, filled with complaints about how hard his life was while I was gone. This time, I had barely heard from him at all. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there in hindsight. The way he had pushed me to add his name to all our accounts before this deployment, claiming it would make managing finances easier while I was gone. How he had insisted on handling all the household finances because my military schedule was too unpredictable. The gradual isolation from my friends and family, always with reasonable excuses about why we couldn't visit or why they couldn't come over. What Eric didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn, was that military spouses like me don't survive 3 deployments without learning to plan for the worst. We don't trust blindly. We prepare. And years ago, when I first started deploying, I had taken steps that Eric was about to discover in the most painful way possible. As I went through my medical rounds that day, checking on soldiers recovering from everything from broken bones to shrapnel wounds, I thought about trust. These men and women trusted me with their lives, their pain, their fears. I took that responsibility seriously. I had extended the same trust to Eric, and he had weaponized it against me. But trust is a two-way street, and betrayal comes with consequences. Eric was about to learn that the woman he thought he knew, the compliant wife who managed the household while he pursued his dreams, had been planning for this possibility all along. I waited until after evening chow to respond to Eric's email. The mess tent had emptied out, leaving just a few soldiers playing cards in the corner and the ever-present sound of helicopters coming and going from the landing zone. I opened my laptop and stared at the cursor blinking in the reply field. Years of military training had taught me the value of measured responses. When someone attacks you, you don't react emotionally. You assess the situation, gather intelligence, and respond strategically. Eric's email wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a tactical error of epic proportions. I typed 5 words. "Are you sure about that?" Then I hit send. The beauty of the response was its simplicity. Eric would read it and wonder what I meant. He would probably dismiss it as the desperate bluster of a woman who had just lost everything. He would go back to his new life, confident that he had outmaneuvered me completely. And for the next few days, he would be right to feel confident. But confidence built on ignorance is dangerous, and Eric's understanding of our financial situation was fatally flawed. 3 years ago, before my second deployment, I had consulted with a JAG attorney about protecting military families from financial abuse during deployments. The horror stories were everywhere: spouses draining accounts, running up debt, even selling family homes while their military partners were overseas and unable to respond. The attorney, Major Patricia Holmes, had been blunt about the risks. "Captain Bishop," she had said, "I see this more often than I care to admit. Deployment stress breaks marriages, and when they break, the spouse at home usually has all the advantages. They control the mail, the finances, the narrative. You need to protect yourself." So I had. I established a military spouse financial protection trust, legally separating my military pay and assets from our joint accounts. Everything Eric thought he had taken was actually just the surface layer. Money I had deliberately left accessible to maintain the illusion of normalcy. My real assets, including the house deed and the bulk of my savings, were protected under military regulations that carried federal criminal penalties for unauthorized access. Eric had stolen money from a deployed service member. That wasn't just divorce court material. That was federal crime territory. I opened a new email and began typing, not to Eric this time, but to Major Holmes. It was time to activate the protections I had hoped I would never need. Within minutes, I had sent copies of Eric's email, the bank statements, and the photos to both the JAG office and my civilian attorney back home. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they involve crimes against military personnel, they turn with the full weight of federal law behind them. Eric had just declared war on someone who had spent years learning how to fight and win. He was about to discover that some battles are decided before the first shot is fired. The response came faster than I had expected. Major Holmes emailed me within 6 hours, her message arriving during what passed for night in Afghanistan. The timestamp showed she had sent it at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, well past normal duty hours. "Captain Bishop," she wrote, "I have reviewed the materials you sent. We are implementing immediate protective measures under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. I have already contacted federal authorities regarding the unauthorized withdrawal of funds from accounts protected under military spouse protection statutes. Additionally, I am coordinating with your civilian attorney to freeze all assets and prevent further financial damage. Stand by for updates." I leaned back in my bunk, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth for the first time in days. Eric had no idea what was about to hit him. The Service Members Civil Relief Act wasn't just military bureaucracy. It was a federal law designed to protect deployed service members from exactly the kind of financial predation Eric had just committed. Violating it carried serious consequences, including criminal charges and mandatory restitution. More importantly, it meant that everything Eric thought he had gained was about to be reversed. Over the next 48 hours, emails began flowing in from my legal team. The civilian attorney, Rebecca Chen from Morrison & Associates in Clarksville, Tennessee, was particularly thorough in her updates. "Lauren," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that we have obtained emergency court orders freezing all accounts that Eric accessed without authorization. The bank records show that the withdrawals began 3 weeks ago, well within the time frame covered by your deployment protection orders. We have also confirmed that the house deed remains solely in your name, as the trust documents specified. Eric never had legal authority to claim ownership." The next email was even better. "Additionally, I have been in contact with the local sheriff's department. The house has been secured, and all unauthorized occupants have been removed. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, has been keeping an eye on the property and reports that Eric and his girlfriend were quite surprised by the law enforcement visit yesterday morning." I could picture it perfectly. Eric, probably still in his pajamas, answering the door to find deputies with court orders, the look of confusion giving way to panic as they explained that he was living in a house that didn't belong to him, that the money he had spent belonged to a deployed service member, and that his actions constituted multiple federal crimes. The girlfriend, Brittany, had probably been even more shocked. 22 years old and suddenly facing the reality that her sugar daddy was actually a criminal who had been living on stolen money. I wondered how long it had taken her to pack her bags. But the most satisfying email came from Major Holmes herself, updating me on the criminal investigation. "Captain Bishop, the FBI Financial Crimes Division has accepted the case due to the interstate nature of the crimes and the federal military protections involved. Agent Martinez will be the lead investigator. Eric Bishop is being charged with wire fraud, theft from a government employee, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Each charge carries significant prison time and mandatory restitution. The agent wanted me to tell you that this is one of the clearest cases of military spouse financial abuse she has seen." I closed my laptop and stepped outside into the Afghan night. The desert air was crisp and clear, with the kind of silence you never get in populated areas. For the first time since receiving Eric's email, I felt truly calm. Eric had thought he was so clever. He had probably spent weeks planning this, timing it for when I was at my most vulnerable and isolated. He had counted on the distance, the communication delays, the assumption that I was too far away and too distracted by combat operations to respond effectively. He had forgotten that I was a soldier. And soldiers don't just fight battles, we plan for them. 2 weeks later, I received an email that made me laugh out loud in the middle of a briefing. Captain Rodriguez looked at me with concern. "Everything okay, Bishop?" I showed him my phone screen. It was an email from Eric, and the subject line read, "Please call me urgent." The message was a masterpiece of panic and desperate bargaining. "Lauren, I think there's been some kind of mistake. The police came to the house and said I was under federal investigation. They froze all my accounts and said I have to move out. This is insane. I know you're upset about the divorce, but this has gone too far. Can't we work this out like adults? I'm willing to give you half the money back if you call off the lawyers. Please call me as soon as you get this. My phone might be disconnected soon because I can't access my bank accounts. This is ruining my life." The best part was the complete lack of acknowledgement that he had done anything wrong. No apology for the betrayal. No recognition that he had stolen from a deployed service member. Just outrage that there were consequences for his actions. I forwarded the email to Major Holmes with a note. "I assume Eric's panic means the investigation is proceeding smoothly?" Her response was immediate. "Agent Martinez reports that Eric Bishop retained a public defender yesterday. Apparently, no private attorney was willing to take his case pro bono, and all his assets are frozen pending the investigation. The girlfriend disappeared 2 days ago. Her social media posts suggest she has returned to her parents' home in Florida and is claiming she had no knowledge of the criminal activity. I almost felt sorry for Brittany. Almost. She was young, and probably genuinely naive about Eric's financial situation. But she had also been perfectly happy to live in my house, wear my jewelry, and post photos of herself enjoying the fruits of my labor while I was dodging bullets in Afghanistan. Ignorance might be a legal defense, but it wasn't a moral one. The military grapevine at the FOB had picked up on my situation, as military grapevines always do. Word had gotten around that Captain Bishop was dealing with a cheating spouse back home, and the response from my fellow soldiers was overwhelmingly supportive. Care packages started arriving with little notes. "Hang in there, Captain. Your military family has your back. Some people aren't worth the uniform." Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had noticed my mood the day I received Eric's original email, pulled me aside after the evening briefing. "Captain, I don't know all the details of what you're dealing with back home, but I wanted you to know that my wife went through something similar during my first deployment. Spouse cleaned out their accounts and moved in with someone else. It nearly destroyed her." "What happened?" I asked. "Military legal helped her fight it. Took 2 years, but she got everything back and then some. The ex ended up doing time for fraud. Military justice doesn't mess around when it comes to protecting deployed families." "How is she doing now?" Martinez smiled. "Remarried to a good man who actually deserves her. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened." As I walked back to my quarters that night, I thought about his words. Eric's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed truths I might never have discovered otherwise. His true character, the strength of my military family, the wisdom of the precautions I had taken years earlier. Most importantly, it had reminded me who I really was. Not the accommodating wife who had spent years making excuses for a man who didn't deserve them. I was Captain Lauren Bishop, a combat veteran who had survived 3 deployments and earned the respect of her peers through competence and courage. Eric had picked a fight with the wrong woman. The 3rd week brought news that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Major Holmes called me personally this time, rather than sending an email. Satellite phone calls were precious commodities on deployment, usually reserved for emergencies or the most important communications. "Captain Bishop," she said, her voice crackling slightly through the connection. "I wanted to give you a personal update on the investigation. Agent Martinez has uncovered additional evidence that significantly strengthens the case against your husband." "What kind of evidence?" "It appears that Eric's financial crimes extended beyond just your accounts. The FBI discovered that he had been using your military credentials to apply for credit cards and loans, forging your signature on documents while you were deployed. The total amount of fraud now exceeds $100,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. 100,000? Credit cards in your name that you never authorized. A second mortgage on the house that he obtained using forged documents. A personal loan from a predatory lender that used your military service record as collateral. Eric Bishop wasn't just unfaithful, Captain. He was running a sophisticated financial fraud operation using your identity and military status. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. While I had been focused on the $38,000 he had stolen from our joint account, Eric had been systematically destroying my financial life through identity theft and fraud.
"The good news," Major Holmes continued, "is that all of these crimes fall under federal jurisdiction due to your military status. The penalties are severe, and the evidence is overwhelming. Agent Martinez believes this will be one of the strongest military spouse fraud cases she has ever prosecuted." "What happens now?" "Eric will be formally arrested within the next 48 hours.
The charges include identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, and multiple violations of military protection statutes. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts." After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. The man I had married, the person I had trusted with my life and my future, had been systematically destroying everything I had worked for. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, that it took my breath away. But alongside the shock came a fierce satisfaction. Eric had thought he was so clever, using my deployment as cover for his crimes. He had assumed that I was too far away, too distracted, too trusting to discover his schemes until it was too late to stop them. He had been wrong on every count. The next email from Rebecca Chen contained the details of Eric's arrest. He had been taken into custody at 6 a.m. while trying to board a bus to Florida, apparently planning to join his girlfriend at her parents' house. The arresting agents found him carrying a fake ID and nearly $5,000 in cash, money that had been traced back to the fraudulent loans he had taken out in my name. "Lauren," Rebecca wrote, "I wanted you to know that Eric's arrest made the local news. The headline was, 'Local Man Arrested for Defrauding Deployed Military Wife.' The story mentioned your Bronze Star and your multiple combat deployments. The community response has been overwhelmingly supportive of you." I smiled at that. Eric had always been concerned about his image, about what people thought of him. The idea that his crimes were now public knowledge, that everyone in our hometown knew exactly what kind of man he really was, would probably hurt him more than the prospect of prison time. Justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it's legal consequences. Sometimes it's social consequences. Sometimes it's simply the truth being revealed for everyone to see. Eric was about to experience all three. 6 weeks later, I received the email I had been waiting for. Agent Martinez sent it directly, with copies to Major Holmes and Rebecca Chen. The subject line was simple: "Case closed." "Captain Bishop," she wrote, "Eric Bishop has accepted a plea agreement. He pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 12 years in federal prison and full restitution of all stolen funds, including penalties and interest. The total restitution amount is $147,000. Additionally, he has agreed to forfeit any claim to marital assets and will not contest the divorce." I read the email 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Eric, who had started this nightmare by stealing from me while I served my country, was now facing 12 years in prison and complete financial ruin. The man who had thought he could outsmart a deployed soldier had been outmaneuvered at every turn. The restitution amount was particularly satisfying. Not only would I recover every penny he had stolen, but the penalties and interest meant I would actually come out ahead financially. Eric's crimes had backfired so spectacularly that they had made me wealthier than I had been before his betrayal. Rebecca Chen's follow-up email contained even better news. "Lauren, because Eric signed the asset forfeiture agreement, you now have clear title to the house with no outstanding liens. The fraudulent second mortgage has been voided, and the predatory loan has been transferred to Eric's personal responsibility. You will resume ownership of all marital assets immediately upon your return from deployment." I closed my laptop and walked outside to watch the sunset over the Afghan mountains. The desert sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, the kind of natural beauty that reminded you why some things were worth fighting for. Eric had tried to take everything from me while I was serving my country. Instead, his greed and stupidity had cost him his freedom, his future, and any claim to the life we had built together. The woman he had betrayed was coming home to a debt-free house, a clean credit record, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. 3 months later, I stepped off the plane at Nashville International Airport, officially home from my 3rd deployment. The Tennessee air felt humid and thick after months in the desert, but it smelled like freedom. My sister Jenna was waiting at the gate, her face lighting up when she saw me. We hadn't talked much during the deployment. I had kept the details of Eric's crimes private, sharing only the basic fact that we were divorcing. Now, as we drove toward Clarksville, I filled her in on everything that had happened. 12 years, she asked, her voice incredulous. "For stealing from you?" "For stealing from a deployed service member," I corrected. "The federal penalties are severe when you commit crimes against military families. Eric learned that the hard way." "What about the girlfriend?" "Brittany? She cooperated with the investigation in exchange for immunity. Turns out she genuinely had no idea about the fraud. She thought Eric was just a successful businessman with a wife overseas. When she found out the truth, she helped the FBI trace the money. We pulled into my driveway, and I stared at the house I hadn't seen in 9 months. It looked exactly the same from the outside, but everything about it felt different now. This wasn't the home I had shared with Eric. It was my home, bought with my sacrifice, and defended with my planning. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, came rushing over as soon as she saw the car. "Lauren, welcome home, honey. I kept an eye on everything just like you asked. That husband of yours sure made a scene when the police came. I've never seen anything like it. Thank you for watching the house, Mrs. Patterson. I appreciate everything you did. Are you doing okay, dear? This must have been so hard for you." I looked at my house, my sister, the familiar neighborhood where I would now build a new life. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I'm doing better than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The revenge I had taken wasn't about anger or hatred. It was about justice, preparation, and the simple truth that actions have consequences. Eric had gambled everything on the assumption that I was too far away and too trusting to protect myself, and he had lost completely. As I walked into my house for the first time as a truly free woman, I reflected on how his betrayal had ultimately revealed my own strength and taught me that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply letting someone destroy themselves with their own choices.